tonight, talking about the Washington Huskies tonight, and we are pleased to once again rejoin the show, Roman Tomashoff from the Locked On Huskies podcast. Is this the third or fourth time, Roman, you've been on with us? I have lost count. It has been.
Ooh, I think it might be 4 now because I think we did a spring in 2024 also.
Yep.
And just one quick thing for you, Ryan. Welcome to just a normal week in my life with having to do at least 5 shows a
God,
week.
yeah,
It's a
man.
grind, but it can be very rewarding at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's been challenging, but also it's nice to kind of start getting back into the swing of things and just getting used to like talking to people in a normal, not clinical setting again. So I can just have like normal brain instead of like physical therapist brain with everything. And that's been good. I feel like I'm more of a social human being now than I was like 72 hours ago, which is nice. So this will be
No,
exciting
that's a very
tonight.
fair point.
It's quite literally two different conversation styles, and I sometimes my girlfriend will chastise me. I'll come home and I'll still be in that mode. She's like, "What the hell are you talking about?" I'm like, "I'm so sorry. My brain is still. I haven't had the opportunity to shift gears yet, but I'm excited for this show tonight because I think I mentioned this to you when we had you on in the spring that if we were going to look at a team who is going to be our Indiana in 2025. And by that, I mean the team that seemingly comes out of nowhere to make a playoff run. For me, that team is going to be Washington. I think for some people, that team is Illinois. But at this point, Illinois has gotten so much love in the preseason that it almost feels like they're expected to make the playoffs. And I don't get the sense that there's that much steam around this Washington team, which I mean, maybe I haven't been locked into college football enough to kind of get the full level of discourse yet, but I think there's a lot to be excited about with this team in 2025. And before we kind of get into that, I just wanted to kind of briefly wrap up the first year of the Jedd Fisch era because for me, it's so hard to judge because it almost felt like a year where you couldn't have success because the expectations just surrounding the team, or maybe not expectations is the right word, but the aura around the team is this was a team that was in the national title game, was the national runner up the year before, but then you lose so much talent to the NFL, and then the head coach who brought you there decides that he's going to go to Alabama, and he takes the offensive coordinator with him, and then you have a bunch of other contributors who are slated to come back, go into the portal, and it's almost like this was just, I mean, the colors were the same, the stadium was the same, the facilities were the same, but it almost felt like it was two different teams in less than a calendar year. So, given all that upheaval, all that turnover, how would you grade overall that first season of the Jedd Fisch era?
I'd give it a C. Like you can't really go much higher than that because there were so many self-inflicted wounds. Where you bring up a great point where it's so hard to judge, and so many things went wrong, and yet you were still this close to going 8-4.
Hmm.
Where the ball bounces a little bit differently for you at Rutgers, you don't make so many dumb mistakes that and shoot yourself in the foot in the Apple Cup. Like all of a sudden, we're talking about an 8-4 team, which is exactly where I had them last season. And it just shows what Jedd Fisch was able to do by just like literally having to piece together a team through the spring transfer portal window and not having an offensive line through spring practice and having to, rely on a couple of FCS guys. A guy who had been out of football for 18 months had to make several starts for you at left tackle. It's not a bad thing. Like he looks a lot better coming into this fall as well, Max McCree. But every single thing went wrong
Hmm.
in terms of just how the offseason went. And something I was actually just talking about on our Lockdown Huskies episode that'll be out on Friday. Washington had a normal offseason. And that combined with the talent that they're bringing in, the upgrades that they made in the trenches specifically, plus having a truly electric young quarterback in Damon Williams Jr., everything sets up where I really like where you're going, Ryan, with the, being a sleeper, being the Indiana college football playoff sort of contender. I haven't gone that far personally just yet because it's just such a tough conference,
Hmm.
and you have to get a few things more than just some lucky bounces, which I think is very possible. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities for this team, but I look at everything going around just Washington this season. I think you got better in every single avenue, Plus, by the way, you're returning your two best players from last season, who are both preseason All-Americans now, in running back Jonah Coleman and wide receiver Denzel Boston. So the
Mhm.
top end talent is still there as well, which you love to see. And just everything else just seems like the coaching staff has been upgraded. Like I said, the trenches have been upgraded. You go out and you get the best cornerback in the transfer portal in Takario Davis.
Mhm.
Every single other avenue where you needed to improve, you did.
Yeah, and I mean, it's almost like you read the questions that I sent you beforehand because you kind of just touched on everything that I wanted to get on. But I did want to start on the point you made about shooting yourself in the foot because I was kind of thinking about this morning as I was mentally preparing for how I wanted to talk to you about this episode today. And there was a lot of early season weird stuff that was happening with this team. Like overall, I mean, it was. I wouldn't say one. It was, if we're breaking it down to the Big Ten, it was one of the more penalized teams in the Big Ten. Overall, they were kind of middle of the road in the country. It was about 6 penalties and 52 penalty yards per game. And when you look at the Big Ten conference itself, especially last year, and I think what's interests me about this conference this year is I don't think that this is how the conference is going to play out. I think it's going to be a lot more balanced. I don't know that there's necessarily the high ceiling teams in this conference that we had last year, but how you broke it down last year is, I mean, you had your 4 playoff teams that I think were a step above everyone else, and maybe you can even throw the 2024 Illinois team in there too. They finished 9-3, but then at the bottom, you had your Maryland, your Purdue, your Northwestern. That was kind of a step back from everyone else, but that whole 6 to 14, 15 range in the Big Ten, there wasn't really a whole lot separating those teams. And if you're spotting another team 52 yards a game in penalties, that's a surefire way to put yourself behind the 8 ball right away. And you look at how this Washington schedule broke down last year, if you don't commit 16 penalties in the Apple Cup game, a game that they still had the ball, 4th and goal to go at the end of the game to go ahead and possibly win that, if you don't, commit penalties and special teams, miscues against Rutgers in a game that they otherwise dominated. I mean, you're 6-0 heading into the Iowa game. And with that kind of
Yes.
steam behind you, it's hard to say, like, hey, how does the game go differently? How is the mentality around the team different at 6-0 instead of 4-2? But it just opens up a whole other list of possibilities for you throughout the season. So I was just kind of curious if, I mean, just kind of through spring ball things that you've been kind of able to pick up on any sort of, minor tidbits or takeaways and how you think they plan to remedy the, I don't know if we want to call them discipline issues, but the whatever we want to call them, the shooting themselves in the foot issues from 2024.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because it's one of those things that I think gets better over time where you just kind of look at, again, I just bring it back to the roster and where it was. This is a roster that has now, for the most part, been together for at the very least the better part of a year, where a lot of these guys, it's like, you look at the numbers in terms of how many players were coming in as just new to the roster in 24 versus 25. It's like 44 versus 42. It's
Mm-hmm.
very, very similar. But the majority of those players got here for winter. So they were here for spring. So they were here for summer. And now they're going to be ready for fall camp on July 30th. And it's just one of those things where having all that chemistry and just knowing everyone else just a little bit better is something that I think will really help them out because now the coaching staff knows you a lot better. The coaching staff can put you in different positions to succeed, and just things will all like. I feel like it's really silly to say that things will just look different, but that's the best way to describe it because watching spring practice, that was my biggest takeaway. Was you get out there for the first couple of days and it's, oh yeah, this is a full football team. There's not like 55, 60 guys out here and you had to do half your drills with 3 offensive linemen blocking because that was literally all that you had.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's
Yeah.
something that I think can't go understated.
Mm-hmm. And you got to think too, like that the way that Washington kind of had to go about the coaching search last year too, right? Like they were very late in that cycle with the run that they made to the national title game. So you're late
Right.
getting a coach in, then the coach has to get his assistants in, but then you have the late portal window because one, you were in the national title game, but then two, when your coach leaves, it opens up a portal window for your players as well. So you have these guys going out without the commiserate guys coming back in because the spring portal window had already closed by that point. And that whole first spring for Washington last year, it's just we're trying to make sure that we have a foundation for the season. You don't really get into the nitty gritty of the smaller details of the game when you're quite literally just trying to make your operation functional. So I think that's a great call out by you there that now you have a full spring practice. You have the opportunity to, hey, we build off this foundation that we set last year. Now we can kind of start hammering down these finer details. We know what we have on this roster. You know, we brought our new guys in early so we get a chance to see how they fit into this roster going ahead of time. And I don't think it can be understated how much that can kind of get you ahead of the curve heading into the season, as opposed to, all right, well, now we got to try to figure out some stuff in fall camp that we didn't have the opportunity to figure out in spring.
Yeah, absolutely. That is like I know I keep saying the same thing, but I really do think it's that important that that is something that is just night and day different that I've seen so far from this coaching staff. And like I look at one of the nice things where you talk about hiring a whole coaching staff. That was one of the really just nice parts of what Jedd Fisch's system has been, is he really only brought in 3 new coaches last year. He's actually had to do more coaching hires this past year because they had to bring in 4 guys: the linebackers coach, the safeties coach leaving, and then 2 new coordinators, where he did promote Jimmy Doherty to offensive coordinator from quarterbacks coach, and then Michael Switzer, who's the assistant offensive line coach last year, to offensive line coach. So in reality, like there was almost more turnover this year, but I referenced those guys because it was something that Jedd Fisch talked about when he was promoting them. It's that consistency is key. And the reason he didn't go out and search for a new offensive coordinator was because Jimmy Doherty has been that guy for him as the, eye in the sky, who's the one coach up in the box on that side of the ball, the one position coach that is. And then with Michael Switzer, he was a guy who already had relationships with the majority of players in the offensive line room. He helped in recruiting when players came on campus and different things like that. And I feel like that's just a really good way to summarize just what has gone on with so much of Washington's biggest changes from last year to this year. It's guys who are able to step into bigger roles now. Like I look at running back behind Jonah Coleman with guys like Adam Muhammad and Jordan Washington, who this coaching staff is really high on. And I also look at a guy I just referenced a minute ago, your biggest transfer portal acquisition in cornerback Tacario Davis. Defensive coordinator Ryan Walters doesn't know him very well, but in his last season under John Richardson, he was top 5 in the nation in pass breakups. Like he's just an elite talent at that level. And he already has so much familiarity with the coaching staff that it all just meshes together so well.
You know, speaking of new guys taking bigger roles this year, but also having some familiarity with the staff, I want to talk to the quarterback, Damon Williams, who was really good in a limited sample size throughout the course of the season, and he eventually ascends into that starter's role. And I mean, we're talking about weird marriages there. I thought last year Will Rogers did well making the best of what was a goofy situation overall, originally committing to Kalen DeBoer and then going back into the portal, only to be talked back into coming back to Washington. But eventually he cedes his time to Williams, who I thought played really well against Oregon and then again in the bowl game. He's an exciting talent. He's certainly a more dynamic athlete than Will Rogers is, and he acquitted himself throwing the ball well, too, towards the end of the season. Looking at him for 2025, what is a fair expectation for him? I mean, obviously the ceiling is there, and I think he has the potential to be one of the most exciting players in college football, but I don't know if that's necessarily a fair expectation to put on a guy who has started 2 games, 1 game, 1.5 games, 2 games.
Two games, yeah, 2.5 if you count the UCLA game. And ordinarily, I would say you're right. It's not a fair expectation to put on any one given player, but you're not the one doing it. Jedd Fisch is the one doing that. Every time you put a microphone in his face, he's like, "Hey, Damon Williams, yeah, I'm going to get that guy to New York for the Heisman ceremony one of these days." Like that's so I think it's completely fair to have any sort of expectations for Damon at this point in time. Like personally, I'd be shocked if he's not at worst a top 5 quarterback in this conference by the end of the season. And I say that because like there's a lot of to be honest, unimpressive quarterback play from around the conference, especially, being in the Pac-12 2 years ago and watching what that final season was like at the quarterback position. But on top of that, it's just something where you referenced his completion percentage. He completed 78% of his passes, over 78, 78.2 on the season. And it's something where combining that with his athleticism, Jedd Fisch will consistently call him the fastest player on the team. I don't know if that's true with Jordan Washington, who ran a 10.2 in high school, but he's one of the fastest players on the team at the very least. And we saw what kind of escapability and athleticism he gives you just throughout his time last season, even when he wasn't starting, when he was just used in different situations. And I mention that because all of that is something that's going to help him out this coming season, where I saw people just complaining throughout the year, and rightfully so. The whole, if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have any sort of thing. Some people wanted Demond to take the starting job a lot sooner. But one of the things that Jedd Fisch constantly emphasized throughout the season, because he ended up getting 250, 300 snaps, I believe, it was somewhere in that ballpark by the end of the year. But one of the things that he constantly emphasized was we are getting him in different situations and we're just getting his feet wet because we have a fifth year senior in Will Rogers who can, handle the brunt of the workload right now. And while, there are certainly growing pains that any true freshman is going to need to go through, if we just put him in some of these very specific situations. One of the ones I like to reference is there was a drive where he went in for a couple of plays in the win over Michigan in early October where Jedd Fisch, had been using him to run the ball through the majority of that game. But then he kept him in there and had him throw a quick slant to Jeremiah Hunter on 3rd and 7 and picked up a first down. Like there were so many different little moments like that we saw throughout the season where he came in the red zone against Indiana that just helped prepare him for this moment. So it's not like, Dante Moore, who sat the majority of last season at Oregon. It's not Julian Sayin, who did the same thing at Ohio State. And I think both those guys have, upside of their own, right? Especially Julian Sayin being the number one prospect in that class. But having Demond, who played as much as he did last season, is something that can mitigate those early growing pains. And one more just play that I'll throw at you off the top of my head is we saw the lowlights too, where there was a play against Eastern Michigan where he ran down the sideline and like trucked a guy and then tried to spin back and pick up more yards going upfield, and he got the ball poked out. Like we saw all of those growing pains, and Jedd Fisch said after the game that was like his freshman moment. And all of those things are just going to do nothing but give him a higher floor to start the season than some of those other guys, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And certainly helping him out this year. You mentioned the return of Jonah Coleman coming off a 1,000-yard season. It's a big boon to get him to come back for his last year of college eligibility. One of the best running backs in the Big Ten, if not the country, this season. And you called him out on this podcast for our preview last year. Denzel Boston really took a huge step forward last year. I'm excited to see what his ceiling is this year. But they do have to replace Giles Jackson and Jeremiah Hunter out wide as well. What just kind of overall expectations for the offense in 2025? And you've already called out a couple guys at the running back position, but in terms of pass catchers, who are a couple guys are you looking at to take a step forward this season?
Yeah, one guy who it's hard to say a step forward when he's a freshman All-American last year. And Decker DeGraff is somebody I expect to have a much bigger role this fall as kind of the number 2 tight end still behind Quentin Moore, who's a really nice run blocker. But then out wide, I'll throw 2 names at you. One of them is Penn State transfer Omari Evans, who really impressed in the spring before he got hurt and missed the majority of the spring, but early on, he was someone that really caught my eye. And then another guy is just another 4-star recruit who I think is going to take a step forward this season and then really boom next year, and that's Rasheed Williams. We saw him take some snaps with Demond Williams last year. We saw him get a fair amount of targets when he was on the field. And it's one of those things where I think he's got the opportunity to start this year. I'm kind of curious to see how the starting 3 is going to work out behind Denzel Boston, really, where there are a couple other guys in the slot like Kevin Green, Audric Harris. I think Raiden Vinesbright and Chris Lawson, a pair of true freshmen, are going to end up playing a lot this season and not redshirting. But that's kind of the group where I think that Rasheed Williams is a level above them right now because we've seen him make plays for a couple of years in spring practice, in fall camp, just like we saw with Denzel Boston in 22 and 23 before he got that full opportunity to shine in 2024. And I think that could be the same just kind of trajectory we see with Rasheed Williams.
It would be kind of, I feel bad taking a shot at Penn State fans. That's not what I meant to do here, but it would be kind of interesting to see, for as much flack as Omari Evans in that receiver room got last year, to see him come in and ascend to a wide receiver 2 role on a really good offense in 2025 would be kind of funny, in my opinion.
Oh, I would love to see that. And it's one thing where I talked with my good buddy Zach Seiko over at Locked On Penn State about it. And it's one of those things where I truly don't believe that offense utilized him the way that it could. Because, you go look at the receivers, and yeah, for sure, there were certainly struggles there. But just how that offense was run, especially through that pair of running backs, I think this is an offense where you still have an elite ground game. I think that Washington might end up having the best running back room in the conference when this is all said and done. And I know what I'm saying when I say that, when I look at, all the hype that Mekhi Hughes and that Oregon room is getting, and Penn State as well with their pair of returning seniors. But with Jonah Coleman, with Adam Muhammad, and Jordan Washington, I think Washington has this really great ability to balance it out really well. In that just I always hate using these isms, but the Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, because that's who Jedd Fisch coached under for so long, and we've seen it not just at Washington but at Arizona as well.
What do you view as kind of the ceiling of this offense this season with the new quarterback and with what they return? You know, it was a unit that, from a points per game standpoint, was not super high in the country last year, but there's certainly a lot of star power on this offense. And again, I think when you look at the quarterback position specifically, I think it's a guy who just fits that Jedd Fisch offense a lot better than Will Rogers did.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. It's something where I view the ceiling as top three. I think realistically they can get to top five in the Big Ten in both points and yards per game. And a lot of that does come down to the fit. It comes down to the offensive line being better. And it does come down to Damon Williams, as you said, Ryan, being that perfect fit for a Jedd Fisch offense. Because that's something where when we saw Jedd Fisch struggle with red zone play calling last year, I referenced the Indiana game a few minutes ago when Damon had one of his 2 rushing touchdowns on the year. It was something where they just they put him in, ran the read option, got their one of their best athletes in space, and he scored a touchdown. And that was something with Will, unfortunately, you just didn't see all the time. And with Damon on the field, it spreads things out so much more because you have to count for him as a runner, because you have to account for whatever running backs and wide receivers they put out there, which are very well coached and have been, proven last season to be some of the best in the conference.
Mm-hmm. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, the Steve Belichick era lasted all of 1 year before his father decided he was going to find a new career as a college football coach in his 8th decade of life. Good for you, Bill. But I really love the Ryan Walters hire, and I get that there's a lot of stink on his name given what he did at Purdue, but we have seen guys not succeed as head coaches who were incredible coordinators before they were head coaches and still be incredible coordinators after they were head coaches. Looking at 2025 here, what do you view as kind of the scheme that he's going to bring, and how is that going to fit in with the personnel he has on hand right now?
It's going to feel very similar to what we saw at Illinois, where there's going to be a lot of these 5 down defensive lineman fronts, where a lot of times there might be 3 defensive linemen and a pair of outside linebackers. But it's going to be very similar. It's going to be blitz heavy. You're going to try to see these coaching, this whole coaching staff really use one-on-one matchups across the defensive line to just there's so many different ways that I want to describe this, but I don't think it's like really even been fully made out yet, because you can do so many different things with not just the defensive lineman that you brought in with a guy like Taitai Uyunglele, who I think can play inside and out, but you also have guys like Exree Alexander who can play inside linebacker and outside, whereas Tai can play that 5 technique and then shift out to a 7 or a wide 9 at different points in time, like we've seen from Ryan Walters in the past. I like to reference Nick Scorton during his time at Purdue before transferring to Texas A&M as a really good comp for how they want to use a guy like Zach Durfee per se. And then on the back end, we're going to see someone like Rashawn Clark in the nickel. I think he's going to do a decent amount of blitzing and help fill holes and run support. And then on the outside, I talked about Takario Davis. Him and Ephesians Prysock, they are, I don't want to say probably, because I think it's pretty clear they're definitely the largest pair of corners in the country at 6'3", 6'4", respectively. Having those 2 guys on the outside, why would you not ask them to just play press man a good majority of the time? So I think that's kind of just like some of the basics. There are so many other things I can go into, but I don't want to keep you here for 3 hours, Ryan.
Oh, for sure. I get that, man. But I just like it's such a weapon having 2 cornerbacks like that, because the ability to play man coverage with your cornerbacks and trust that they are going to lock down the other team's best targets more often than not, what that allows you to do with the middle of your defense, it opens up so much. And this is a Washington team that was one of the best units against the pass in 2024. The run was a little bit of a different story. Any insight as to what kind of befell this team against the run in 2024 and how they kind of go about correcting that for this year?
Depth and injuries, unfortunately, are the two real killers in that department. Where that certainly played into being ranked as high as they were against the pass as well, right? Where teams could just like I keep referencing the Indiana game, but that was one of the best examples of they just ran the ball down their throat all game long. I feel like there were 3 or 4 drives where that spanned at least 12 plays. Like that was just the level of not being able to stop the run, especially after defensive tackle Javon Parker tore his Achilles tendon against Rutgers. You hope to see him healthy this season because he's a guy who can really help this unit take a step forward. Washington fans have been waiting for his like true breakout game, and then unfortunately in the middle of it he gets hurt. But not only do you have more guys coming back healthy, like his twin brother Armon, Bryce Butler, Alenius Davis are a couple guys that I like to highlight as key breakout figures, but they also just got deeper in the transfer portal. I referenced Tai Uyunglele as a guy who can really help succeed and get pressure from the interior of the defensive line, but they also added a former All Pac-12 first teamer in Samote Peppa from Utah, and I just any defensive player that comes from Utah, I will always have an adoration for. And especially a guy like that who can, when he's healthy, can move and really help collapse the pocket. I'm a huge fan of his. And then Ontario Thompson as well, who spent some time at Iowa and then transferred to Western Michigan. He's someone who I was really impressed with during spring practice, is just a big physical athlete. So one of the reasons I'm throwing as many names at you as I am is you didn't have that last season.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were relying on somebody like Logan Sagapolu, who I think is going to improve this season, who had transferred from Miami, where he was playing on the offensive line. Like that was the kind of, and it's no disrespect to him because I think he really has improved, but that was who you were relying on to take 30 to 40 snaps a game in the middle of your defensive line because you didn't have much else behind him.
To illustrate your point, Roman, against Indiana last year, the Hoosiers ended the first half with a 19-play, 62-yard field goal drive that took half of the second quarter off the clock. Their first touchdown drive of the second half was a 14-play, 75-yard drive that took half of the third quarter off the clock. And they ended the game with a 12-play, 44-yard drive that took the last 6 minutes off the game clock. So, yes, there was just a lot of extended drives in that game. But to kind of wrap up our conversation here, there's seemingly few easy days in the Big Ten, and I think this schedule is a very good encapsulation of that in 2025 for the Huskies. You bookend conference play with well, I don't know about it, depends on how you feel about Penn State, but arguably two of the top 4 teams in the conference with a home game against Ohio State to wrap up September, and then a home game against Oregon to wrap up the regular season at the end of November. Get those both at home, which is nice. You also get Illinois, maybe the third or fourth best team, question mark, in the Big Ten at home. But long road trips to Maryland, Michigan, and Wisconsin in this schedule. There's a lot of unknown here, not just with Washington, but I think a lot of that meaty middle of the Big Ten. What is Wisconsin going to be? What is Michigan going to be? Does Rutgers take a step back? Is Maryland going to take a step forward this year? What do you think constitutes success for the Washington Huskies here in 2025, completely irrespective of I think they're a playoff dark horse take?
I think the minimum has to be 8 wins. Where I just look at the way the schedule lines up and I look at even some of those road games. Like going to Maryland is a long trip, but I think that's a very gettable game. I think that Washington will split with Michigan and Wisconsin. I think they win at least one of those games. So I look at the way, like you said, you get your 3 toughest opponents at home. 8-4, 9-3, like it should be the expectation at this point, in my opinion, with the ability to steal one of those other games and get to 10-2. I think that's all well within the realistic range of outcomes for Washington this season, where I've seen some people say, oh, at worst, they're like a 7-5 team, where that should be the absolute floor, in my opinion, is because then things still went wrong. And there are things that must be corrected if you're 7-5. So that's why I say the realistic floor should be 8-4 with the opportunity to grow because you left, like I said earlier, you left 2 games on the table, arguably 3 if you want to count the bowl game with the way that things just seem to fall on that one as well. But I look at the schedule and 9 wins, 10 wins is very much on the table for this team.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about how this schedule sets up, if you're an outside observer of this team is we're going to find out real early how serious of a contender Washington is in the Big Ten this year, because they should start 3-0 with that non-conference schedule. And if you beat Ohio State to end September, that is a hell of a way to announce your presence to the Big Ten in the college football world. And then following that up, I mean, the long trip to Maryland, like you said, I mean, what Maryland's going to be this year, who knows? The trip itself, though, is daunting. Then you get Rutgers after that, and you potentially are 6-0 heading into a trip at Michigan. That's going to be a even bigger game than I think it already is. So I am super fascinated to see this team and how this plays out in 2025.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. There are so many different things that just after what last season was, I think Washington fans are really excited to get back to. And the biggest thing that we can't forget, and I think is very important to end on here, Jedd Fisch needs to find a way to win on the road because he went 0-7 away from Husky Stadium last year. 0-5 on the road, 0-2 in neutral sites. And if he can find a way to do that, he can take Washington back to the college football playoff.
Yeah, I mean 6-0 at home, and you do if you're 6-0 at home in 2025. I mean, this is probably a playoff team because that's wins against Ohio State, wins against Oregon, and Illinois. I mean, that'd be as impressive of a trio of wins that we're probably going to get in the country this year. Again,
agree more.
In theory. What about
speaking.
hypothetical, like just in theory, if Washington does what they do at home again this year, then they're going to be sitting pretty in the grand scheme of things. What about you? What does your schedule look like? Do you get the opportunity to make any of these long road trips this year?
Ooh, I'm really hoping to. Like that's something where I would very much like to. I know I'll be going to UCLA. My mom's birthday is that same weekend, and
Very nice.
being able to visit her, do Thanksgiving a little bit early, all that will be a lot of fun. I have been looking forward to trying to get out to Michigan and Wisconsin for years now. So that is certainly something that is on my docket. I'd like to do Washington and Maryland as well. My dad's living out in New York and wants to take the train down to go see Maryland since UW will be in town and that's my dad's alma mater. But I don't know quite yet. It's a really great question. I'm very excited to try to get to as many of these games as possible because that's just one of the joys of being able to cover this sport. And one of the joys of being in the Big Ten is going to so many wonderful environments from coast to coast. I couldn't be happier about that.
Well, listen, man, if you do end up getting to make the Michigan trip this year, it is quite literally a stone's throw away from my house. So we will have to eventually finally meet face to face. Yes. My people will get in touch with your people. Well, that is all I have for you tonight, sir. And before we let you get out of here, please refresh our listeners' memories where they can find you and your work and what you are working on here over the next couple weeks leading into, well, I guess, the next week leading into fall camp here next week.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm on all forms of social media at rtomashoff34, rtomashoff34. I'm doing a podcast over at Locked On Huskies. Feel free to subscribe to us on YouTube and wherever you get this podcast. Make sure you subscribe to Inside the Pylon as well. Okay. And then all my written work is at uwhuskieswire.usatoday.com. And training camp we're recording this on the 24th, 6 days away. So doing a lot of preview stuff right now, talking about everything that Jedd Fisch said at Big Ten Media Day. And again, with training camp around the corner, there's just so much fun stuff going on in the world of UW athletics. And I really just can't wait to get back out on the field and take it all in.
It is the best time of the year. We're the lull in the sports calendar. No disrespect to baseball is almost over. Football is almost here, and we are super excited for it. And we're always excited to have Roman on the show. He always brings the energy, and our conversations are always fantastic. Sir, thank you once again for joining us this evening. And everyone, thank you for bearing with me this week as you had to listen to my doldrums talking to everyone. We're almost done with the week. We got one more for you tomorrow night. The rare Friday night episode tomorrow night, 9 Eastern, we bring Jack Sobel back on the show to talk the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. We're excited for that one as well. And thank you, everyone, for joining us once again on Inside the Pylon, a Midwest College Football Podcast. We'll see you all tomorrow night.